Masks: A New Generation is probably my favorite RPG system right now, and I recommend it to anyone who wants to run either a superhero game or just a strong narrative, player-driven campaign in general. So, what exactly is Masks, you might be asking? In short, Masks is a game about young superheroes fighting evil while also struggling with their identities, relationships, and emotions, inspired by stories like Spider-Man, Teen Titans, Runaways, and Invincible. I have a longer answer somewhere in me, but the explanation will require me to dive into exactly what makes this game so brilliant. So here are 4 reasons why you should give this game a shot. Like most games in the Powered by the Apocalypse family, or PbtA, this game is incredibly accessible in terms of mechanics. If you've played Apocalypse World, Dungeon World, or Monster of the Week, you'll know what to expect. But even if you haven't, Masks should be very easy to pick up. I know, because I've run this game for several people who were completely new to roleplaying, and they really didn't have any trouble getting used to the mechanics. As a player, all the rules you'll need to know are either on your character sheet or on a 2-page reference sheet. And if you're the GM, you'll only have a couple more pages on top of that. Die rolls are never more complex than 2d6 plus or minus a small modifier. But at the same time, these PbtA games never feel overly basic or dumbed down. They just feel like they're focused entirely on collaborative storytelling rather than tactical decision making. The dice and the mechanics aren't there to simulate the world's physics or determine the outcome of every little decision. They're only there to help the group decide what happens after a dramatic turning point. Outside of a handful of abstractly defined moves, you and your group can narrate the action however you want. And the rules will never get in the way or slow down the pace of the story you want to tell. There's nothing inherently wrong with more tactical systems, more on that later, but an abstract system is your best bet for really capturing the essence of the genre you want to emulate. And speaking of genre, some people, even Masks players, will try to tell you that because Masks isn't focused on the details of the character's powers, it's not really a superhero system, and more of a teen drama system disguised as a superhero system. Do not believe these people for a second. Masks is way more of a superhero system than Champions or Mutants and Masterminds, or any other system like that lets you calculate exactly how many pounds you can lift with your telekinesis skill. Look at all the best superhero stories. They aren't about superpowers, or even really about saving the world. They're about the emotional struggles of relatable characters with larger-than-life responsibilities. The things that the heroes can do are never as important as the problems they face. And Masks recognizes this completely. The game takes a specific type of emotional narrative, the coming-of-age story, and centers each character class around a problem one might face while growing up. The Transforms, for example, is all about negative body image resulting from an inhuman appearance, and their moves reflect the insecurities they feel while embracing their outward nature. The Legacy is about trying to live up to family expectations, and they have moves that encourage you to value your family's words above those of others, even if you don't necessarily agree with them. In terms of powers, each playbook does give you a handful of suggestions, but these really are just suggestions. You can basically give your character whatever powers you want, unless they actively trivialize your core conflict. The Beacon is about desperately wanting to be a hero despite not having impressive powers or skills, so giving them Superman-level strength would defeat the purpose. On the other hand, the Nova is about self-control and learning the consequences of one's actions, so their powers need to be really strong but prone to collateral damage. I've talked a lot about emotional arcs being more important than powers, but I don't want to give the impression that gameplay doesn't involve plenty of epic fights against supervillains. More so than any other game I've played, Masks brilliantly promotes character drama through conflict, to the point at which there just isn't a barrier between combat and role-playing like there is in other games. So far, I've talked about how Masks focuses on actual character development rather than just fighting enemies and leveling up. You might be thinking, that's all well and good, but I'm not sure my players are gonna buy into that kind of gameplay. Well, the truth is that the system basically forces it. Like I've mentioned earlier, many of the special moves are intrinsically connected to the narrative core of the playbook in question. The game's equivalent of ability scores are called labels, which represent how your character sees themselves, and they can change dramatically over the course of a session through the words of influential NPCs, or even teammates. That can certainly shape the course of action that the players might take. But no aspect of the game does as much work to promote character drama as the 5 conditions. They might seem unassuming at first glance, but these things brilliantly encourage players to take their character's emotional problems seriously without outright forcing them to do anything. See, each of these conditions gives a penalty towards a certain type of move, and if you ever mark all 5 of them, you have to flee, pass out, or completely lose control. It's possible to clear conditions using moves, but you can also clear them by completely giving in to them. If you're angry, go blow up a car and you'll feel much better. If you're insecure, go do something stupid without consulting your teammates, and you'll at least be put back into perspective. In my experience, this is the most common way that the players clear their conditions, which results in an environment where the character's internal problems actually feel significant. And since these methods for clearing conditions will generally cause further conflict in the narrative, they'll constantly escalate the tension, and can lead to a ton of memorable character moments. As a PbtA game, you can play Masks with just the online basic rules that I've linked in the description. And in the case of Monster of the Week, another PbtA game, I've gone on record saying that you'll probably be fine running the game with just those. For better and for worse, I can't say the same about Masks. Both superhero stories and coming-of-age stories should be laser-focused on the characters and their personal growth, rather than on plot, setting, or villain. And that kind of thing is generally hard to pull off in an RPG. I've already talked about how Masks makes character drama feel totally natural for the players through its basic mechanics. And the book provides plenty of excellent advice for GMs about how to craft a player-driven story. This includes a more in-depth explanation of the basic moves and what their consequences should be, to input on how you should help players develop their backstories during character creation, to potential examples of personal conflict for each of the character classes. It also includes a pretty unique formula for developing villains that's both really easy to use and conducive to developing memorable personalities and encounters. If you've already run multiple superhero games or lots of PbtA games, then you might be able to get away with just the basic rules, but I think that the book is just too useful to pass up, and can elevate the storytelling in your game to a whole new level. Plus, a good deal of the advice can be used for running games in other systems. Like I said at the beginning of this video, Masks is probably my favorite RPG system, but it's not a system for everyone, and it's certainly not a system that you can use for lots of different types of stories. It's not just a superhero game, and it's not just a character-driven superhero game, it's specifically a coming-of-age superhero game. If you and your players want to use a different narrative template, then you can try out Worlds in Peril, which is another PbtA superhero game that's a little more generic. You also might not love this game if you hate the idea of your character's emotions being determined by game mechanics. Players who come from games like D&D will be used to the idea of the rules only being there to simulate physical phenomena like sword strikes and fireballs, while their characters' dispositions, barring mind control powers, are entirely up to them. On the other hand, in Masks, if an NPC trash talks your character, then they can become angry. And you can express this anger however you want, but you can't just say, "No, I don't care." Obviously, I think the condition mechanics are a lot of fun, and I've never personally ran a game for anyone who had a problem with them. But I could see why some people might not like them. And I'm not just talking about the power gamers who aren't into the idea of playing insecure teenagers with genuine character flaws. You can run a campaign focused on character drama without any narrative mechanics. And PbtA fans can sometimes be pretty elitist about how other systems are only useful for grindy dungeon crawls. In fact, the ceiling is technically higher if the players have complete control over the narrative. But there's a reason I don't recommend pure freeform roleplay over actual systems. Nobody is a perfect storyteller, and the rules of Masks are very useful for keeping the story on track and providing inspiration for what to do next. Still, if you do want to have complete control over your character's problems and how to solve them, then this might not be the system for you. Before I wrap up, I wanted to touch on a couple of potential concerns you might have about this game, and why, in those cases, you should try it anyway. The first is if you think this game might be too demanding for RPG newbies, and you might be better off running a more traditional game like D&D or Mutants and Masterminds. No. PbtA systems are the absolute best systems for newbies, and this one is no exception. While Masks is slightly more complex than, say, Monster of the Week, and is a little harder to run, it's still really easy to grasp on the player's end. Really, all you need to know is the basic moves, your playbook moves, and how conditions and influence work. As I've said before, this can all fit on a couple of pages, and I've ran the game with several people who had never played an RPG before, and they had no trouble understanding the mechanics. Another concern you might have is that you've read through the playbooks and none of them really appeal to you. Or you might think that class-based systems are too rigid, and that you at least want to mix and match traits from different playbooks. Fear not. As long as you stay within its genre, Masks is highly customizable, and I do wish the book was even more open about this. The abilities and looks are just suggestions, plain and simple. In terms of taking moves from another playbook, every character has the option of taking them after leveling up, and I'd personally allow players to substitute one of their starting moves during character creation if they'd like to. As written, there's no way for characters to gain features from other playbooks that aren't technically moves, like the Nova's flares and the Beacon's drives. But really, you should also be able to substitute a move for one of those, as long as you aren't stepping on another player's toes. If your protege is an elementalist who struggles to keep their powers under control, then let him take burn and a couple of flares, why not? As long as there's not an actual Nova at the table, it's all good. Besides that, there are a surprising number of quality, fan-made playbooks to check out. And if you feel like a real special snowflake, it's even feasible to make your own. In order to do that, though, you should probably get some experience running the system. So all the more reason to get your game started. And those are my thoughts on Masks. On one hand, I want to make more videos on this system because I love it so much, but on the other, I'm not really sure if I need to, since the book is just that effective in explaining how to run the game. Regardless, I hope I've convinced you to give this game a shot, and if you do, I hope you have fun. See y'all later.